Welcome to The Explainer. You know, every single day we hit play on our favorite songs, right? But we rarely stop to actually think about the invisible machinery that put that specific track in our ears. So today, we're going to look at how the power of music discovery has completely shifted. We're talking about a massive move from corporate boardrooms straight into our own living rooms.
It really brings up a question that kind of challenges our basic assumptions. Who actually makes a superstar? Are our favorite artists just the product of raw, untamed talent, or are they carefully engineered by industry gatekeepers? Because when we see a superstar dominating the charts, it's super easy to assume their sheer musical genius naturally propelled them to the top. But, well, history actually tells us a different, much more structured story about how stardom is essentially manufactured.
Traditionally, this whole star-making power was the absolute domain of A&R executives. That stands for artists and repertoire. They basically acted as the ultimate liaisons between the raw talent and the highly commercial machinery of record labels. Think of them as the ones scouring smoky nightclubs, deciding who actually had the magic, and ultimately holding the keys to the kingdom by handing out those highly coveted recording contracts.
To really understand this dynamic, we've got to look at two completely distinct paths of artist development. On one side, you have the industry oversight model. This is where labels heavily engineer their stars, literally controlling their clothes, their songs, and their overall sound to ensure maximum commercial viability. Counter to that is the artistic freedom model, where artists autonomously control their own songwriting and image, completely resisting that heavy-handed corporate moldage.
Now, to really grasp this, we have to follow the money. We're looking at some extensive research into the economics of music creators here, and it shows exactly how these two models have battled it out through different eras of tech and consumer habits. At the end of the day, it's all about the economics behind the art and who really controls the purse strings.
Let's jump into era number one, the analog hitmakers. This was a time of massive, almost unilateral executive power. A perfect example of this is the legendary Clive Davis. He famously operated with an incredibly deep, hands-on approach. He really demonstrated how the industry oversight model could lead to historic, record-breaking success, especially when paired with generational talent like his work with Whitney Houston. I mean, he didn't just sign her, he painstakingly curated her repertoire, finding the exact right songs to perfectly pair with that incredible voice of hers.
Actually, there's a fascinating story that highlights this dynamic perfectly. So Davis brought Whitney a babyface song titled "Why Does It Hurt So Bad?" But initially, a young Whitney completely rejected it. She said she just couldn't relate to that level of romantic devastation. So instead of forcing it, Davis just put the song in a drawer and held on to it. For 5 whole years. It wasn't until Houston was going through a really painful divorce that she came back to Davis, read the lyrics again, and told him she finally understood the song because she, quote, hurt real bad. She was finally ready to authentically record it. That right there shows the incredible patience, control, and vision of traditional A&R.
But we have to keep in mind that this oversight model was stunningly expensive. Labels desperately needed massive hits because the upfront costs were just astronomical. To put that into perspective, back in 1990, Columbia Records spent a combined $2.3 million just to produce, redo the video, and generally promote Mariah Carey's debut album. Wow. When you're investing that kind of cash, you simply cannot afford to leave the artistic direction to chance. You engineer a hit.
Which brings us to our next section, looking at the 1980s, the MTV visual revolution. Suddenly, the music industry wasn't just about what you heard.
MTV arrived and literally altered the landscape overnight. Suddenly, a band's success wasn't just about the audio track anymore. MTV required media-savvy artists to freely experiment with bright colors, rapid-fire editing, and these intense, dreamlike visuals. It launched the careers of highly visual artists like Madonna, and it massively boosted established acts who managed to adapt to this new global visual order. Basically, music became a dual-sensory experience.
Now, this brought about a massive debate between superficiality and creativity. While critics definitely panned this new MTV aesthetic as superficial, arguing it distracted from the actual music and was even detrimental to traditional literacy, there was absolutely no denying its power. Superficial or not, it became the ultimate window into what was hip and hot for American youth. If you wanted to be a massive star, you absolutely had to conquer the visual medium just as much as the auditory one.
Moving on to Era 3, the digital disruption. This is where the power shifted entirely to the fans.
Think about it like this. In the analog era, music distribution was severely limited by geographic boundaries. We call this regional interconnectivity. You pretty much relied on local radio signals, local record stores, and regional tour promoters. But today, the internet provides global interconnectivity. It completely obliterated those physical barriers. An artist sitting in a basement in London can instantaneously be heard by a fan over in Tokyo.
So the really crucial point here is the massive financial contrast this created. Remember that $2.3 million Mariah Carey album we just talked about? Well, thanks to digital production tools, an independent punk band like TSI was able to record an entire album right in their living room for just $10,000. I mean, that is an absolute fraction of the cost from the 90s. The barrier to entry just completely plummeted.
And this newly accessible tech completely democratized the modern path to fame. Independent bands like the Arctic Monkeys and Vampire Weekend, they didn't need a Clive Davis to mold them. They literally just handed out demo CDs, their fans uploaded the music to MySpace and blogs, they built a massive online buzz, and pushed them to sell hundreds of thousands of albums completely outside the boardroom. They achieved massive mainstream fame without ever having to change their sound.
As the scholar Clay Shirky points out, new technology enables new kinds of group forming, and that's exactly what happened. The fans themselves essentially took over the marketing and distribution roles that A&R and label promoters used to hold. Instead of just consuming music, fans became active participants in an artist's development.
Which leads us to our final section, the new independent artist. Because navigating this new democratized landscape is highly competitive, and it comes with a massive double-edged sword. See, while artists got freedom, the major labels were losing serious money. Thanks to piracy and the rise of file sharing, labels saw their profits absolutely plummet. And the reaction? Well, they largely abandoned the artistic freedom model. They pivoted hard back to extreme industry oversight just to guarantee a return on their shrinking investments. They basically stopped funding long-term artist development and started relying heavily on outside song doctors. Why? To engineer guaranteed, immediate, homogenized radio hits for acts like Daughtry or Hinder. And this brings us to the core tension of today's music ecosystem. Paul McGuinness, the longtime manager of U2, hit the nail on the head when he pointed out that consumers have come to love free. Industry veterans argue that this expectation inherently devalues the creative work itself. It makes it incredibly difficult for a developing, independent artist to actually financially survive without that major label backing we just talked about.
But here is the really harsh reality for today's musicians when we look at the active versus the passive fan. Having thousands of passive online followers means absolutely nothing if they don't actively support the band. We've literally seen bands with huge online play counts simply have to break up because they couldn't afford to keep the lights on. A passive like doesn't buy a tour van, you know? Only buying a record or a concert ticket does.
So the traditional gatekeepers of the analog era are mostly gone, and the power is squarely in our hands now. But with that power comes a choice. Is your free consumption of music supporting or starving the artists you love? In this digital age, your active support is the new A&R. Are you going to be the one who helps develop the next great artist, or will they just fade away in the noise? Definitely something to think about the next time you stream your favorite new track.